This week on Poll Hub, from this summer's steamy temperatures to the fires in Hawaii, the climate has been front and center in the minds of many. But for America's youth, it may be adding to their anxieties. We explain. Then, do you like shopping for trendy clothes at a reasonable price? Well, who doesn't? We turn the discussion to fast fashion, and spoiler alert, there may be some serious downsides to getting the latest looks for less. And at what age should children be allowed to drink coffee? That's this week's fun fact. I have my opinion. This is Poll Hub. Let's get started. Hi, everyone, and welcome to Poll Hub. I'm Mary Griffith.
I'm Emily DuPoint.
I'm Delaney Hayes.
And I'm Eve Fisher.
And I'm entering my senior year here at Marist, and while the next generation will probably have worries that will be a bit different than mine, for right now, climate anxiety is one of the biggest worries of my generation.
And there's good reason for that. According to the World Meteorological Organization, the WMO, this July was record-breaking in many ways. It was the hottest July on record. The world's sea surface temperature hit historic highs for the fourth month in a row. Sea ice coverage was the lowest ever recorded, and the first week of July appears to have been the hottest ever recorded.
And on top of that, the fires in Hawaii have been nothing short of devastating. So far, 115 people have died, while an additional 850 people are still missing.
The heat we've been experiencing here in New York this summer appears to be a mere annoyance in comparison to the terrible and deadly repercussions of climate change that we're witnessing in Hawaii. And the list appears to be growing as Hurricane Hilary drenches Southern California with unprecedented rainfall. Although the Category 4 hurricane was supposed to have passed over, the storm's tail end has left the area vulnerable.
With an abundance of scientific data, as well as these more visible effects of floods and fires disrupting everyday life, there is good reason to be concerned about the climate. But for some, this concern has turned into downright anxiety. The climate crisis has become such a large-scale issue, and I mean, it's not like someone who is stressed about it can overcome their anxiety just by deciding to bike to work instead of drive. And we are all well aware that collective action will be necessary to deal with climate change.
Dr. Stephen Taylor is an Australian clinical psychologist and professor in the Department of Psychiatry at the University of British Columbia in Canada. And he describes this issue of climate anxiety as having different levels of severity.
When we're talking about climate anxiety, what we're talking about is a person's degree of worry about climate-related things or things they attribute to climate change. And I guess these days we're attributing every so-called natural disaster to climate change. Anyway, so climate change varies on a continuum. For some people, they don't have enough anxiety about the climate. They're walking around in denial, saying it's okay. There is not a problem, it's a hoax. So that's at the very low end, and that can be problematic because people with not enough anxiety don't get out and do anything about the problem. But on the other extreme, there are people with extremely high levels of anxiety about the climate. Now, this is the thing, their anxiety is actually interfering with their lives.
Climate anxiety is present in children and young people in countries across the world and has, in fact, been shown to impact their daily functioning. According to a study published in The Lancet, 59% of youth and young adults aged 16 to 25 in 10 countries, including the US, India, and Brazil, said they were very or extremely worried about climate change, and more than 45% said their feelings about climate change negatively affected their daily life and functioning. Dr. Taylor puts these numbers into perspective.
With those sorts of questions, what we encounter commonly with those sorts of self-report questions is an over-reporting. And you get that with measures of symptoms, with other sorts of things. So no doubt many people are concerned about climate and it is impacting their lives. But the question is, for how many people is it a severe impact as opposed to a mild hassle that we're struggling doing our best? So we don't know how many people are severely impacted, but probably it is a large minority. Anxiety
isn't the only emotion young people experience in relation to climate change. The survey also asked about the emotions climate change brings up. While 62% said they were anxious about climate change, 68% said they were sad and afraid.
As a member of Gen Z, I can definitely say that the stories and posts on climate change that I see on my social media feed, on a daily basis have the power to affect my mood.
So, is the media playing a role in this issue? According to Dr. Taylor, responsibility goes both ways.
Media or any information that we get about threats and disasters will fuel our anxiety. So that the media does play a role, but we shouldn't jump to blame the media because we are consumers. If we didn't click that button to watch that latest wildfire in Hawaii, for example, it wouldn't be on the media. So it's a two-way street. But with the 24/7 news cycle, yes, we're getting information about disasters globally, real time, all over the world, and that will increase people's sense of threat.
But are there any solutions short of fixing the climate? Or is it just something the younger generations will be forced to live with?
I wonder about this, especially as a mom of young kids who will grow up in this stressful environment. And when it comes to treating other anxiety disorders, therapy, prescribed medical treatment, and even society's growing willingness to discuss mental health issues have gone a long way to help those struggling with these disorders.
And thankfully, so we don't end today in a state of spiraling doom, Dr. Taylor offers us some perspective on the possible treatments for climate anxiety.
The climate anxiety is a little more tricky to treat than ordinary, let's say panic disorder or OCD or post-traumatic stress disorder. In those cases, the anxiety is unrealistic and excessive, or the trauma has passed. You can't say that with climate anxiety. You can say, yes, well, you're more anxious than the situation warrants, but that's a bit of a judgment call, and the trauma hasn't passed. We're living it. So for coping, it's a matter of adapting to the current situation as best we can. And for people who are very anxious, often what works in these sorts of situations is doing something. The old saying, don't just stand there, do something. People feel better. And for managing climate anxiety, many people find they can manage it better if they get linked to other people and get involved in, say, their communities, so they feel like they're doing something about the issue.
And like other forms of clinical anxiety, it's important to be aware of the warning signs and seek help.
If you're finding your climate anxiety is just out of control, if you're noticing red flags, like you're more irritable than usual, you're more depressed, you can't get out of bed, people say, hey, you're not your usual self, then they are red flags that the emotion, the stress of climate has become a problem in itself. In that case, I'd recommend that you go see your family doctor and see, because there are lots of treatments for anxiety-related problems. Some of the more simple ones, the self-help ones, the stress managements, they work well for a lot of problems. But if you notice that your problem is too severe, then please go see your family doctor, because anxiety problems are treatable. There are effective treatments out there.
It's really nice to know that you don't have to just sit in your anxious thoughts. And there are measures that can help people cope with climate-related stress, such as being active in community organizations or receiving treatment from medical professionals.
It's absolutely comforting, and knowledge is power. So being aware of the triggers, the reactions, and treatment options provides hope for future generations.
Fast fashion. It's a concept that is taking the clothes industry by storm. If you haven't heard of it, fast fashion is the production of budget-friendly, trendy clothes that lure customers with ever-changing styles and affordable appeal.
But beneath the surface of affordability lies an intricate web of challenges, social, environmental, and ethical, that some say we just can't afford to ignore.
By quickly responding to shifting fashion trends and delivering new products at an astonishing pace, fast fashion brands have surged in popularity over the past few decades. According to a study published in the International Journal of Research and Review in September 2021, brands have leveraged technology and efficient supply chains to convert designs from the runway into cheap clothes on store shelves within a matter of weeks. This transformative approach has not only revolutionized the fashion industry, but has also brought about shifts in the consumer expectations and behaviors. Designs from the runway into cheap clothes on store shelves within a matter of weeks.
Jody Hartman is the senior lecturer in the fashion design program here at Marist College. She discusses the purchasing habits of the fast fashion era.
When you're producing and putting 6,000 new items on your website every day and people scroll the website every day, they're going to want something new. I don't think most consumers purchase because it's eco-friendly or, it's something that's going to be durable and last a long period of time. I think people purchase because they just want something new. regardless of the consequences.
Just what are those consequences? In an opinion piece published by the New York Times in November of 2022, a graduate student who took a job in the returns department of an online superstore argues one crucial yet often overlooked aspect of fast fashion is excessive returns.
Her job was to quickly decide whether returned clothes could be resold or should be tossed. And she discovered there's a lot of waste. According to a 2018 report by the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, 66% of discarded clothes end up in landfills. And since many modern clothes are made, at least in part, with polyesters, a type of plastic, they'll be with us for centuries.
And there's more. The United Nations Environment Program reported in 2019 that the fashion industry overall is responsible for 10% of the world's carbon emissions, and that those carbon emissions will grow by 50% by 2030.
At the heart of the fast fashion dilemma lies the concept of planned obsolescence, a strategy used by clothing brands and other industries to design and manufacture products with limited lifespans. In fashion, that's especially easy because of the fashion styles and trends that are always changing.
The Ethical Consumer is a UK-based advocacy group championing ethical consumerism. It has reported extensively on fast fashion and says the average adult in the UK buys 60% more clothes than they did in 2000.
And Americans are weighing in on fast fashion. According to a survey conducted in 2020 for an environmentally friendly bedding company, Avocado Green Mattresses, while only 38% of Americans knew what fast fashion was, once informed, 54% of all those polled said it's going out of style.
Some brands are taking the initiative to ensure that they take steps towards sustainability, like recycling programs, eco-friendly materials, creating more durable clothing, and working with the secondhand market. But the secondhand market is likely not the only solution.
Secondhand apparel currently is only 10% of the market. I think we're going to see a huge increase in the secondhand market. Most consumers today, the goal is, we like to sell things so we can buy something new. The problem is a lot of it sits and doesn't sell. So what's going to happen to those? Are they going to end up in landfills? What are we going to do with those? More and more retailers are going to be ending up in that secondhand market to sell back. We're seeing it with J. Crew right now. We're seeing it with a lot of other companies. But, the concern is with the consumer who will always want something on trend. That secondhand market might not be on trend. It's great for vintage, but when you're looking at fast fashion, I could see it on the runway today and 6 weeks later, it's in my Zara store. So I think that's going to be hard, but I think secondhand market is going to become a very viable, important step in the apparel industry going forward.
In a 2016 article, NPR reported to recycle, sell, or make other apparel, a number of clothing companies have established take-back programs that collect unwanted clothing from customers. Since 2013, H&M, for instance, has permitted customers to bring unwanted clothing that will then be converted into recycled textile fibers for new items. 0 garments going to landfill, according to the company, is its goal. And eco-conscious Patagonia sells used Patagonia gear at its stores and recycles them.
But are these initiatives to reduce the environmental impact of fast fashion seen as genuine efforts or as more of a marketing strategy? Here's what Professor Hartman thinks.
I think businesses are still having a hard time adjusting to being sustainable, ethical, because they're using factories and they're pushing production and they're using polyester or plastics. And to them, I think number one will always be profitability. I think there's greenwashing going on with these companies, especially H&M and Zara. I have their vegan leather, which isn't vegan at all. It's plastic. But they're telling the customer that it is a sustainable and ethical because it's vegan, and in reality, it's not.
A lot of this relies on us, consumers, and secondhand fashion could be a start. The market is increasing. According to the most recent annual fashion resale study from the secondhand online apparel store ThredUp, the U.S. resale market has grown 21 times faster than apparel retail during the last 3 years.
Yes, and in 5 years, the $24 billion secondhand market is anticipated to grow to $51 billion, according to ThredUp. If the secondhand market keeps expanding at this rate, it will eventually surpass fast fashion.
But even with the secondhand fashion sector growing, fast fashion is unlikely to go away. Its market value is currently more than $122 billion and is forecasted to grow to more than $184 billion in 2027. That's according to Statista. Professor Hartman suggests the industry has a big part to play.
We need to, as an industry, shift the consumer behavior, right? Because we need to shift it in a way that when they purchase something, it's going to be more durable. It's going to last longer. Part of this is paying a fair wage. That's why clothing's so cheap, right? One of the things I always say to my students, you're sitting with your cup of coffee this morning. How much did you pay for it? Well, that's more than the worker made to make your garment. And sometimes that coffee costs more than they make an entire month. But I think things like that, getting that word out, educating the consumer, and that could maybe help shift more and more consumers. I think consumers will shift. It's going to be slow.
Professor Hartman makes a good point about spreading awareness with consumers, and making clothing that lasts is something that I can definitely get behind.
People are catching on to the ugly side of fast fashion. Hopefully this means fast fashion can finally go out of style and we could start shopping in the way that's nicer for our planet.
It'll be interesting to see if these concerns punch through enough so that consumers and companies find a good balance that's fair. But it seems as though that a change in the fast fashion industry starts with the consumers.
All right. Well, Lee is not here this week, so I have big shoes to fill in talking about this week's fun fact. And we are talking about coffee drinking, but not just about adults drinking coffee. This is a question that was asked in 1948 of women ages 18 and over, asking, how old do you think children should be before they are allowed to drink coffee? And this is a question that came from the Roper organization. And 36% said between 13 and 16 years of age, followed by 27% who said between 17 and 20 years of age. The only other response in double digits was between 10 and 12 years old, and that was 14%. So I have a couple of different ways to tackle this question, but let's talk with some of our students to get their perspective on this fun fact. Delaney, why don't we start with you?
This might be a bit hypocritical as an avid coffee drinker myself, but I would maybe say, I don't know, between 17 and 20, just so I could avoid having to fund my child's caffeine addiction. That makes any sense, because I know my mom probably suffers from that. So that's my take on it.
And Emily, how about you?
So my grandmother had the rule for my mom, on your 15th birthday, that's when you can start drinking coffee. So my mom on her 15th birthday walked down the stairs and made herself a cup of coffee. And it was the same rule for me. But my mom, I don't know if you guys have ever heard of coffee milk.
Absolutely.
Yeah. When I was younger, I loved the taste of coffee. So my mom would buy that for me. And I was probably like 10, 11 years old when she started buying that for me. So I started really young.
So I'm going to bring Eve in just a second. But on the topic of coffee milk, when I was a kid, way back in the Stone Ages, my parents and grandparents used to just give us a tiny bit of coffee with basically like a cup of milk. So we thought we were all cool and old and drinking coffee, when in actuality it was just milk with a tiny bit of coffee. So we didn't buy it. We actually made it in the household. But Eve, how about you? What do you think?
Well, I had the same problem when I was a kid. I really wanted to be a grown-up and drink coffee. And my parents wouldn't let me drink until I was about 15, I think. But I think at that point, they just kind of stopped caring because it was younger for my siblings when they were growing up. So by the time I got into high school, they didn't care anymore. But when I was younger, I would always get out a coffee mug and put coffee ice cream into my mug.
Oh.
I would trick myself into feeling like an adult.
So you got around things a little bit. Okay. All right. And let's bring in our producer, Athen.
I don't know. I started drinking coffee at like a very young age. My mom, like I would sit with my mom on like the weekends and she would let me have like a sip of her coffee when I was like in elementary school. And then I remember in middle school, that's when she's like, okay, you can have like a cup of coffee in the morning. So I feel like I was probably like 12 or 13 when I started drinking coffee. I don't think it did anything bad to me, fingers crossed, but I feel like 12 is like the lowest, I think, that coffee should be drank at.
Yeah. I mean, so as I mentioned, when I was younger, we used coffee milk. We drank coffee milk as kids. But I honestly don't remember when I had my first real full cup of coffee, probably high school, college age. And I think that's probably for my kids where I'd like them to be in the mix, maybe around 17, between the 17 and 20 age range, just so that they're not sort of bouncing off the wall, staying up all night and all that. But, they're a little closer to your ages than to my age. So you may have a different view about that. But do you all drink coffee?
Yeah, probably too much. Like I was saying, it's to the point where I go to bed at night and I'm excited for my Dunkin' coffee of the day. So
I see a lot of heads shaking, and I'm just going to hold up my cup of coffee. That's from earlier, but I carry around a cup of coffee with me pretty much all day long. So I see that Emily is doing the same and Delaney's holding up hers as well. And that's awesome. So why don't we all go grab another cup of coffee and get ready for the rest of the afternoon. And we will check back in with everyone next week.
That'll do it for Poll Hub this week.
Poll Hub is produced by the Marist Poll at Marist College in Poughkeepsie, New York.
Mary Griffith is our executive producer. Casey Schaff is our production supervisor.
The Poll Hub team includes Athen Hollis, Emily DuPoint,
Eve Fisher, and Delaney Hayes.
If you enjoy Poll Hub, please consider leaving a review.
Positive reviews help other listeners like you find us.
If you have questions for us, tweet them at us at Marist Poll.
Remember, you can always tell your smart speaker to play Poll Hub, and with any luck, it'll cooperate.
Finally, wherever you listen to Poll Hub,
there is a subscribe button. Click it, and the latest episode will be ready for you in your podcast app as soon as it's released.
We'll see you next time.